on the topic of ethical philosophy under Daoism with focus on environmental ethics. Please.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I would also like to thank you again from Professor Takahashi. For me, it is the 10th time to come here. From the first time I came to Kumamoto University, Kusunoki Kaikan, I really loved it very much, and I continue to come here. It was one of the joys of my academic life to be a part of this roundtable. I'm very happy, I'm very grateful to Professor Takahashi and Professor Nader, who first invited me to come and see this activity. So this year, this is a work on environmental ethics. How did I start thinking about this? I had a master's student, an American master's student, who had this idea to work on environmental ethics based on ideas of Buddhism. The reason he chose Buddhism was the success of the country of Bhutan. Bhutan has been very successful in actually they are not only not contributing to CO2 emissions, because under this government the forests have flourished and they are actually taking a lot of CO2. So the country is actually reducing the CO2 load and helping with the climate change problem, the global warming problem. And all this effort has been based on their culture and the Buddhism philosophy. So he tried to work on that, and he didn't go to Bhutan, but he tried to study other countries, other Buddhist countries, to see if something like that was happening. And he also focused on the theory. But when he went to the theory, he didn't find much. He found actually, one of the things he found, and I also checked it, was like a quote that nirvana is a place where nothing grows. So then I suggested, let's go and see what theory in Daoism has, and let's focus on what Daoism says about the environment. And this is the result of that. For me, Daoism was something new, but I really like the philosophy, and especially its focus on the significance of nature, protecting the nature, and how it can be used as a source of thought of the value of nature and our relationship of humans with nature. And maybe this is why we are in so much trouble these days. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Daoism, but mostly about its significance for the environment. Okay, it's not, maybe I should. Okay, so Daoism or Taoism sometimes, you see that Chinese character, also Japanese character there, which means road or the way, Dao. And so what is Tao, what is Dao? It's a mystery what Tao is. It could be the mother of all existence. So interestingly, in Daoism, we don't have a father as God. We have the role of mother that led to all existence, led to this universe to come into existence. And also the way a person goes in trying to enlighten himself and try to find the truth and live a truthful life is also called Tao. So it's very philosophical. It's one of the most intellectual, you could say, religions. And remember, it was at the time that, at the same time that Daoism was flourishing, we had the ideas of Confucius. And also Buddhism very soon joined. So we had these three main philosophies growing in China. And there are differences between them. So Confucianism focuses on courtesy, good manners, and good government. But for Daoism, it's not about government. It's about self-government. It's about a look inward. It's about a spiritual journey for the person. So I could not say they are competing. They are, even the area they're working is quite different. Usually Daoism is ascribed to a person who could be a fictional person, but most historians believe that he really existed. His name was Lao Tzu, and he left a manuscript. Most of it is probably produced by him, but over time some other philosophers added some comments, and this manuscript is about 5,000 words. It's called Dao De Jing. So you see how the second character means virtue, and the third character there means like a textbook, a book, a masterpiece. It's a character commonly they use when they want to refer to material, collection of material text. Interestingly, this book, they say after Bible, is the second most translated into different languages in the world. So many people are so much interested in the deep philosophy in this very small book, so it has been translated to so many different languages. Okay. So Daoism doesn't think of man as the focus of its philosophy. For Daoism, nature is the focus, and man has a part in it, like so many other living things. For Daoism, humans are not the center. This is a very interesting, this is something currently in environmental ethics, so anthropocentrism was rejected just a few decades ago. But from the beginning, Daoism says nature is the center and man has to find its right place in it. Another interesting thing about Daoism is its positive view of life. Life is good. Life is not suffering. Life is not bad. Natural life is a good thing that could be enjoyed and could be appreciated for what it is. So again, very different. Basically, the universe also is not a bad thing. Coming to life is not a bad thing. It's something to be appreciated. So in Daoism philosophy, they talk about the rhythm of life and the mind spirit, which is simple, following the nature, and the importance of having balance and harmony between these two. So I will go to... Okay, so for Daoism, the purpose is living our life well, living a good life with nature. So in Daoism, we try to withdraw from artificial belongings, and we try to find harmony with the natural world, living in harmony and living simply. While Buddhism discourages the desires and says, these desires keep us clinging to life, and talks about suffering and how we have to escape from this suffering and this repeated cycle of reincarnation and coming back to suffer. Daoism accepts life the way it is and thinks of it as basically good and something to enjoy. And even in Daoism writings, very often you see a sort of humor. So the sage in Daoism uses humor a lot, uses sometimes sarcasm, sometimes uses mysterious words that can be interpreted in different ways, and is having fun, with it. And later I will show you some paintings. So Taoism later, influenced even art in China, influenced art in Japan, influenced poetry. So there are a lot of poems, there are a lot of paintings. There are even martial arts which are in the form of, again, an artistic movement of the body that are all influenced by the philosophy of Daoism. So, okay, it's not working. So, there's a story. It is probably a fictional story. It's just a myth, but it is so famous, so popular, and there are very old paintings of it. Many other painters have tried to copy that painting, and it all goes back to a mythical story where three men, Confucius, Buddha, and Lao Tzu, they are gathering around a vat of vinegar, and they are tasting it, and they are saying how they feel the vinegar tastes. Of course, in this painting, they are just representing, these are the three biggest sages of the three main philosophies in China, Confucius for Confucianism, Buddha for Buddhism, and Lao for Daoism. And the vinegar represents the essence of life. So Confucius tastes it, and his look in the painting appears like the taste is sour. So for Confucius, the men have lost their ways. They have lost what heaven wants them to do. And they have to find their way, they have to be governed well. So he has a sour face. Buddha has a bitter expression. Why? Because life is suffering. Life is filled with desires that keep us connected to this life. And there's a dissatisfaction with it. The only person who's smiling is Lao. He loves the vinegar. He loves the life. So this is the interesting thing is this basic look at what life means. So in Daoism, nature is sacred. Man is not the measure of the universe. All the living share the universe together. And each one of them has a place in it, and they have relationships with it and with the nature. Nature is the one to regulate all things, not the man regulating things. Nature regulates things. And man has to look at how nature regulates things, to understand it, to appreciate it, to learn lessons from it, not to try to change it. And the difficult part for me, because I wanted to say a few things about the ethics in Daoism, but you find very little about that in Daoism, and the reason is very important. So some scholars have even said that morality and ethics in Daoism have been ignored because you don't find much about it. You don't find instructions like to tell a lie is wrong or to kill people is wrong. You don't find such ethical explanations, instructions. So why doesn't Daoism emphasize on morality? Because it has to be taken for granted. In Daoism, it's not that morality which comes with instructions, which comes with feeling obliged, feeling the obligation to do something, doesn't have any value. The ethics of Daoism comes from the core, the natural core, the existence of the sage, who understands if he does something unethical, it means ignorance. So it's not from desire that somebody does something wrong, it is from ignorance. So morality is a precondition for normal life. It's not an obligation to conform to the will of God. It's not, I don't do this something right because God has asked me to do it, or God has ordered me to do it. I do it because my core follows the nature of things, and in that core, there is nothing bad in it. And I would not do something wrong if I follow that core. So morality is a natural cooperation with the harmony of the universe. Sin is not disobedience. Sin is ignorance. A sinner is an ignorant person, not somebody who is an outlaw or a disobedient person. So morality becomes an inward judgment of wisdom. A wise person would act morally, and he doesn't have to be said to do so. So intentional virtue, where the mind looks outward, is not the goal of Taoism, but natural harmony with nature and surpassing moral instructions, meaning that, let me show you what it means. It may be a little bit difficult to grasp, but this is probably the best quote I found that explains how ethics in Daoism works. Daoism says, after you lose Tao, after you lose Tao, after you lose the way, then you start talking about virtue. If you talk about the virtues, it's because you have lost the Tao. When you start talking about benevolence, it's because you have lost virtues. When you start talking about justice, you have lost benevolence. And when you lose justice, then you talk about rules of conduct. And remember, this last step is where Confucius starts to talk. What does it mean? When I was explaining this to my friends, and they couldn't understand what is meant by this, I gave them an analogy. My friends are all married. So I said, do you trust your wife? Does your wife trust you? And they said yes. And I said, if they question you, if they start doubting you, what do you think? They said, the moment they start doubting me, I think there's nothing left. You see, when there is, if something is there, it doesn't have to be said. It is just there. It exists as it is. When we lose it, we start talking about it. So if I lose the way, then I start talking about these are the good virtues that we need to do. When I lose virtues, then I start talking about, be kind, be compassionate to other people. When compassionate is lost, then I say, let's be fair to each other. And when that is also lost, when we talk about, we should have laws, we should have rules, we should have regulations. So if we don't lose Tao, you don't need to instruct about other things. And this is very beautiful. Of course, I'm not saying it matches everybody. I mean, this is probably not for everyone, but this is for somebody who has been to some extent, enlightened, and at least wants, to step on the way, to find a way. So what is the position of environmental ethics? Before that, this line is also related to, the previous slide. Daoism discourages the abuse of goodness as a means to influence, and calls it an everlasting shame. To say, this is something good, and I'm doing something good, and because of this, you should follow me. So this has been a very common way to actually influence people for somebody's own, personal goals. The sage doesn't claim he is good and he is teaching goodness. The sage is teaching the way, and the way is the way of the existence, of the natural existence, and follows that way. Very often not by saying, but by doing. So these are some differences again in the ethics of Daoism. Daoism, they say, existed, flourished and grew and developed at a time where there were many wars in China. So some of the principles in Daoism appear to be especially about keeping peace. So in Daoism, war is the ultimate degradation of man. And it is said that, there are quotes for him. When he arrives in a place where the enemy is defeated and they are, collecting the bodies, he says, don't think you have won. It is like you have entered a funeral. You should respect all these bodies. This is not something to be happy about. This victory is not a victory. This victory is a funeral. So not going to war would have a lot of value, and he talks very much about the value of inaction, not taking action. As long as you can, don't enter a conflict, avoid a conflict. Also, when it comes to education, Daoism again says how use of rewards and use of punishments is the lowest form of education. This is actually what we say nowadays, what is said nowadays in psychology. When we train animals, we use a technique called shaping. So using rewards and punishments is how we train animals. And in psychology, they say this is not a good way to try to teach, manners, or to teach, good behavior to children. You have to use cognitive ways. You have to help them understand. You have to provide them with wisdom. Not that, using, it's very similar to what Pavlov did. So rewards and punishments are the lowest form of education. Nowadays you see we have had a lot of scientific and technological progress, but this has only caused technological wars, more damage to the nature. It hasn't provided us more peace. Actually, we are worried about, a lot of conflicts. We are worried about nuclear attacks, nuclear wars, and so on. So the man who exploits the nature and damages has descended below the animal. This is the ethics of environment in Daoism. When the human damages the environment, he has lowered himself lower than the animals. He has descended below the position of animals when he destroys the nature. So nowadays we see humans have only started to compete more and more over resources. They have intensified exploitation of nature. They have intensified destruction of nature for their profits. So in Daoism, harmony is not only among humans, but it is among all living beings, including humans. So the kind of consciousness that Daoism talks about does not only belong to humans. We are talking about a spiritual form of consciousness that involves all the universe, involves all nature, and humans can join that kind of communication with nature. So Daoism would support conservation efforts of ecologists and field scientists because protecting the nature, not damaging the nature, is so important, so significant for the position of human, in the universe. So one of the main principles in Taoism, you see the characters again, is Wu Wei. I think the Chinese pronunciation is a little different, like Wu Wei something. And what it means is non-action, non-doing, non-forcing, letting go, non-assertion, moving with the currents of life and nature. So allow the nature follow its rhythm. Don't intervene, don't interfere in nature. Let the nature do its job. And you have seen, we think science has so much progress and we have advanced so far, but you see all the problems we have caused, from the ozone layer to CO2, greenhouse and other greenhouse emissions and climate change and biodiversity loss, and all these problems are simply because we don't understand the natural rhythms of life, invasive species. So problems that we caused to appear, they would have not happened if we realize nature is a lot more complex for humans to interfere in. So there is a very interesting concept that has moved from Daoism into Zen. So Zen Buddhism has a lot of influence from Daoism in it. And that is spontaneity. So spontaneity, which is about harmony with nature. You don't plan your actions. You move naturally with the flow of Tao. The flow, when you are in harmony with nature, you're spontaneous. You don't have to, I don't have to say, this is your duty to do. When the time comes, you know what you need to do. So you see this influence in painting, in poetry, in archery, and in fencing, in a lot of martial arts. So in Taoism, with simplicity, with spontaneity, there is joy, there is lightheartedness, and a carefree spirit. So these are some of the paintings in Daoism. You see how nature is beautiful, how nature is amazing, how nature is everything in art. And it's shown just as it is. This is another painting, mountain, trees, non-disturbed, just the way they are. Simply, very, very simple, like minimalist art is part of, again. And these are some other paintings. These are all influenced by Daoism. I have heard from some of my Chinese friends that, in fact, although most Japanese people don't talk about it, but Daoism has actually influenced a lot of things. For example, when Japanese people talk about enjoying life, enjoying peace with nature, when they, in their life, in their design of the house, design of the garden, they introduce nature. They talk about delicious foods to eat, enjoying, eating, enjoying life. This is an influence of Daoism. So finally, this is an example of the poetry in Daoism. Of course, it has been translated. It may not have the, but it talks about life and death and how it is so easy for the sage to understand life and death. So the sage gives himself off to whatever the moment brings. He knows that everybody is going to die. He is going to die too. And he has nothing left to hold on to. He has no illusions in his mind, no resistance in his body. He does not think about his actions. His actions just move freely from the core of his being. He holds nothing back from life, therefore he is ready for death, just like a man who is ready to sleep after a good day's work. So natural. So I was fascinated with, with the philosophy of it. I have read some of them in full, some of them I have read pieces, but I was amazed. A philosophy 2,500 years ago, so deep, so spiritual, so open-minded. There is no gender problem in Daoism. Men, women, you know about yin and yang, so there is no opposition. Everything is just natural. So anyway, thank you very much. I hope I made you interested in Taoism. If you have questions or comments, please.
Thank you very much for the presentation. My response as follows. To begin with, what is meant by the Tao? The Tao is identical with nothingness, which is indefinite and unlimited per se, as ultimate reality, from and to which everything comes and returns. From Tao clear nothingness issues one. From one occurs two. From two emanates three. And from three arises everything. Or from nothingness emerges being, and through being originates everything. There was no word in the beginning of heaven and earth, but then there arose word in the mother of everything. In contrast to the biblical statement according to which there was the word in the very beginning. Contrary to the Western thinking, beginning with being and word or laws, for Lao Tzu and Buddhism, nothingness or emptiness precedes word or laws and the distinguished characteristics of Eastern thought. The modern Japanese Kyoto school philosophy is in line with this tradition in confrontation with Western thought. Especially Nishida's idea of absolute nothingness comes from the complex Lao Tzu and Buddhist tradition. Even the mathematical concept of zero stems from the Indian Buddhist idea of emptiness and promotes its further development, though the Western tradition never goes beyond one and being. The Taoist idea of inactivity in combination with naturalness signified the self-realization of freedom, transcending causality, as a dialectical unification of subjective action and objective causality, free will and fate, at the inward self-enjoyment of mind, without entailing matter under social order or institutional systems represented by Confucianism. The sages enter to the forest mountains without reformation of the already existing society with the aid of political power, but are confined to the individualistic tendency towards the inwardness of their own minds. On the contrary, the modern Japanese philosopher Watsuji employs the idea of absolute nothingness as a fundamental principle of human existence, i.e. ethics, on the basis of which human activity is to be manifested and developed in the form of the individual existence and the social organization, in the mutual self-negation as a result of the perpetual emptying function of absolute nothingness in the socio-historical dimensions. The problem is how to mediate the secular world to natural inactivity as true freedom, without escaping from the socio-historical actuality, in which the human subject of action in question is involved. In other words, how to realize true freedom as actionless action in relation to the actual society, in which evil and injustice, even under the pretension of good and justice, are superposed and accumulated in the complex structures beyond the harmony with nature and the surrounding circumstance. What is at issue is how to construct a harmonious correlation with the social substratum based upon the natural environment on the level of particular species for the attainment of universality. Another Taoist philosopher, Sanzi, says that there is great beauty in heaven and earth without saying. There is the obvious laws in the cyclic time of 4 seasons without utterance. And there are principles and laws of becoming of all things without discussion. And hence, sages inquire into the cause of heavenly beauty and realize its truth. The ancient sages contemplate the truth of the universe, and this attitude of contemplation or intellectual intuition remains up to the modern philosophy of Nishida. Hereby heaven and earth are the same as nature, and the primary object of sages' contemplation is nature, but not culture and a human construct, which is the limitation of the age. On the contrary, in modern times, human subjective activity becomes predominant over nature. Even agriculture is not natural, but the product of human activity in connection with nature. Therefore, Nishida articulates the correlation between human subjective action and the objective given nature in the formation of the historical world to create variable things, one of whose results is the progress of science and technology with the advance of knowledge. The socio-historical development gives rise to the emergence of the legal state existence, which is mediated by the natural land. So it might be very important to consider the relationship between nature and culture in terms of the human subjectivity of free action to transform the given actual world into the ideal harmony. In this regard, it might be highly significant to apply Whitehead's analysis of the human experience, in which the subjective act of becoming in the present and the objective being in the past are integrated into a higher unity of a new actuality, in the temporal process as well as in the spatial extension. For Whitehead, peace is a harmony of harmonies, and the present era of human civilization should be aimed at a worldwide harmonious society. For the purpose of attaining the future goal, ancient naturalism represented by Lao Tzu should be reviewed from a comparative perspective of the world intellectual history as the primary substratum of human thought, in cooperation with the social practice of reformation of the already existing actual world by synthesizing the different elements of human ideas appeared so far in history. In comparison to Buddhism, particularly in the later developed Mahayana Buddhism, the concept of inactive activity, true original naturalness, is also found at the self-realization of one's own essence, i.e., absolute freedom, above and beyond any bondage of the causal destiny. opposed to the pessimistic escape from the mundane world, as a dialectical unification of eternity and time through negative mediation in personality. As regarding the opposition between good and evil, Confucian and Lao Tzu take part in the side of human nature's original goodness, with the optimistic bent in line with Neoplatonic and Christian theology, according to which evil is just appearance without its own reality, as a temporal absence or devoid of goodness. This tendency prevails even within the Mahayana Kyogon Buddhist school, in contrast to the Tendai school retaining a stark opposition between good and evil. Nishida seems to take the same line formally, but in his last significant thesis demonstrates God's assumption of the demonic evil in the final analysis. And this stance might be in accordance with Tanabe's retention of the radical evil in human freedom.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I received also your written comments, and I read it a number of times. It's very philosophical, and I have to read it more. Some parts, what I can say, what I understood, like in Taoism, it talks very much about emptiness, very similar to Buddhism, being empty. And it also uses another analogy, the uncarved wood that has potential, because when we fill ourselves with a lot of ideas, we cannot be innovative, we cannot grasp new ideas if we don't get rid of these. So we have to empty ourselves. We have to become like an uncarved wood that can be shaped into so many different things. So this was one part. The other one was about Tao, that what I understood was that Tao is the nameless thing, that one way of imagining it is thinking about a God, one way of imagining it is something just beyond us that we cannot even try to describe it, and it's better even we try not to name it. And it has eternal existence, but Tao leads to the existence of two things, and the third thing, and as you said, and I think it's from there to, he says 10,000 things, all the things. It's about yin and yang, how the two opposite things work together, and the two opposite things are not actually totally opposite. They have a little bit of each other in themselves. So you see it in the symbol of yin and yang, white and black, and inside the white you have a little black inside. So meaning that opposites are not fully opposites. It's like men and women. We have elements of each other like that, and so together they create new things. So anyway, thank you very much. I understand philosophy is very deep, very analytical. At the same time, Daoism had this interesting characteristic that it can be interpreted in so many different ways. And apparently, the Daoists intentionally did that so that you can interpret it in so many different ways. And you can take what you want from it. For me, like the idea of non-action was, don't destroy nature, don't intervene in the work of nature. It was for me that, and for environmental ethics. But it can also be interpreted in so many different ways depending on, what is your idea.
Thank you very much. One of the Taoist influence on Japan is the name of the Japanese emperor, Tenno. According to Taoist religion, there are three gods. The top is Tenson, heavenly noble. The second is the Tenno, heavenly king,
Yes.
And the third is just Japanese emperor. Very interesting. For any other question?
You focused on the environmental ethics, and the Taoism, the basis of the ethics. So I want to ask about this point. As Professor Ozaki said about nature, between nature and culture, so you said that living in harmony with nature is a very good way, or ultimate happiness, or Daoism. And my question is, what is nature? What kind of nature do you think about? Is it like wilderness in the context of environmental ethics, or the nature like the land around the village? Okay.
So of course, this is again my interpretation. I don't think it means wilderness, but if I want to speak in modern terms, I would say he was talking about the complexity of ecosystems, where we have living things, unliving things, and together they have a lot of interactions, and they are so complex. You have this rhythm of seasons being repeated, and winter doesn't mean death, it means potential for spring, and spring leads to, and we have to go with the flow, we have to try to understand and try to learn from it. So it's not just wilderness, we are part of it, and we are probably not very good at surviving in wilderness, but we can learn from the work of the nature, for example, from the life of that tree that is growing in my backyard, or from the way of looking at all these birds and all these animals around me. So very often when they depict Lao Tzu, they are showing him riding an ox, like a male bull. So to me he seems like a very friendly person who is very easygoing with nature and with natural things, with animals. He feels himself as a part of this nature, one of these beings, and he knows how to connect to them. So yeah, nature for me means a lot more broader in Taoism than wilderness. It's everything. It's like our planet. Our planet as a major ecosystem where everything lives in there, our existence. But I don't understand this cosmology. Very often they had larger views of cosmology, and actually I don't know how it can be related, but I think the natural world, the living, would be a major part of it, life, and that is what amazes me. Life, bioethics, love of life, and so on.
Thank you. I have some other question, but other so.
Thank you, Nader, for a very nice presentation. We really enjoyed. It is very interesting to note that there is a shift from anthropocentric aspect to the cosmocentric this thing. But there are some religious traditions which talk about or which include even non-living beings also. But you are talking about living beings other than human beings. But some religious traditions like Hinduism, for example, even Buddhism, talk about even non-living beings also, which has to be taken into account when we are talking about the environmental ethics. So this is for your kind consideration. And secondly, when they reject or when there is no concept of God as such, how do we talk about the spiritual world? Because there is always a view that one has to transcend this world so that but which you have denied, the transcendental aspect of world is denied. So what kind of spiritual world that they are talking about? Then finally, how far the principles of Taoism could be relevant to the present problems, the environmental problems? Can we interpret it in such a way so that it can be relevant to the present problems which we are facing?
About the first thing, actually in Daoism, there's a lot of talk of non-living things.
Okay.
They actually have a square with 64 elements around it, and they show it with a system of 3 lines in 3 rows. And for example, water has a lot of value. Water yields. They talk about, for example, the power of water, soft power of water, that by yielding it overcomes everything. And so they talk about so many. They talk about non-living things that also make the environment too. The second part about God. This is again, I think it's my interpretation. I cannot be sure about it, but to me, Taoism believes that something as large as God, and there is a saying that the only thing that you can say about this nameless thing is that it is the biggest. It is so big. It is so, you can only be amazed by its size. It's so big. It includes all the. So I think that could be one interpretation of what we call God. But what he says is that it is for us impossible to understand it because it's at a different level, and uses an analogy how humans would not be able to understand it. Like, how does a mosquito think about humans? It's in that analogy. So doesn't try to go there because he sees himself unable to. And the third part was.
How could you apply this to the present problem?
This is just what I said in the slides. Learn from the complexity of the nature. Don't rush into management of the nature. Don't rush into changing it. Don't rush into destroying it, thinking that there is something better you can create. The best creations you can learn from the work of the nature. So, be patient, be humble regarding nature. You are just part of the nature. You are not the manager of it. And this is what I think I can learn for current problems and respect it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, good morning. Thank you for your good presentations. Actually, I have very simple questions. We know recently there are different kind of environmental ethical theories like deep ecology, biocentrism, and American environmentalisms. Actually, my question is that do you think that any sort of recent ethical environmental theories are fit with the notions of Daoism? For example, is it similar to deep ecology or similar to biocentrism or similar to American environmentalism? So how can we understand this theory? When that book was written, I think Tao Te Ching, when that was written, the environmental catastrophe or problems are not so serious. So that book was not written regarding the sense of environmental problem. But Tao Te Ching was included the view we have to live with the nature, with harmony, in harmony with our surroundings. That is the central environmental views of Tao Te Ching. But how can we understand this theory? How can we realize this theory? Is it similar to deep ecology or biocentrism or American environmentalism?
I have seen some interest among academics, even in USA, to Daoism. When they show an interest, I think it usually has two components. One component is they like the spirituality, which seems to be very pure. And the other thing they like is, as I explained here, is this value of nature and that we are part of nature and we have to respect nature. But as you said, it's very hard because current problems are at such large scales that, as you said, those times probably there should have been problems. You know, we talk about how Mesopotamia and how, you know, some other cultures, Mayan culture, and because they didn't respect the work of nature, they were disrupted and they were destroyed. But probably it was at much smaller scale. So I don't know how it can be used for current problems. But it just gives you some, you can say, philosophical insight into something very simple. And the interesting thing about it is simplicity. It's so simple. And because it's simple, it works. Because, you know, something simple can be expanded to, you know, a problem you have. But if it was too complex, it would probably be too specialized to its own time. Simplicity probably is the best thing about it. But I will try to see if, you know, there are philosophies, you know, and schools that are using it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Time is over.
Thank you very much.